Hi, I'm Ted Lem. I'm a CPA working out of Toronto. In this session, I'm going to talk about GST and HST. And the other thing I will talk about are some of the common mistakes when doing HST. Now, in Ontario, there's only HST. So when I talk about GST, HST, I'm talking about the same thing. HST is basically the combination of the provincial and the federal sales tax. So let's say you're an Uber driver, and what happens is you're going to be accumulating sales. The client's going to pay you through Uber, and the client has been charged the HST. So that's the HST from sales. As the driver, what happens is you spend money on licenses, mechanical repairs, gas, meals, and so forth. And these items are going to have HST in it. And so you have to deduct this from the HST that you charged the client. So the net amount is the amount that you remit to CRA. There's a possibility what happens is you can't get a refund. So what happens with some businesses that they started the business and you don't have that much sales and you have more costs than your sales, and you'd be asking CRA for a refund. There's two methods for you to report your HST. There's the quick method and the regular method. You might want to use one or the other, but sometimes there's situations where one would be more beneficial to you than the other. Here's an example. In both cases, what happens is that you've got $100,000 of sales. So with $100,000, you're going to have HST at 13%, which is $13,000. Now, expenses are going to be $40,000. So if you have the regular method, you have HST of 13%. So regular methods, basically, you go into details. The amount that you have to remit to CRA is going to be $7,600. If you were to use the quick method, you would have to remit $9,644. Now in this case, it's better for you to use the regular method. Now, you can't switch in between the year. You can only do this once a year. If you determine that you're going to be using the quick method, you use the quick method. If you determine you're going to be using the regular method, that's the method you use. So here's another scenario. We keep the sales to be the same thing. Now the only difference is that in this scenario, the expenses are different. It's lower. Instead of $40,000 in the last scenario, in this scenario, expenses is $10,000. So if we're to use the regular method here, the net amount that you have to remit to CRA is $11,700. Now, you can already tell that this is less beneficial compared to the quick method. Now in the quick method, what happens is it's $100,000 of sales, $13,000 of amount of HST collected, expenses $10,000 for Ontario. You take 8.8% of the amount that you've submitted, of your sales plus the HST, so the $113,000, to come up with $9,944, and you get a 1% credit for $30,000, which is $300. So the amount that you remit is $9,644. So in this scenario where expenses is much lower, you have a lower remittance amount for the quick method compared to the regular method. Here's an interesting scenario where you are losing money, but you're not registering for a refund. So there's a lot of these businesses, and a lot of these businesses, they feel that because they're making less than $30,000, they don't have to register for GST. When I go by a lot of their operations, I notice that they do have expenses, and I've talked to people, and I can put a number on to how large their expenses are without counting their inventory. And so let's go through this scenario. You make sales of only $1,000, and you collect HST of 130, or let's say you register, you collect 130, but you have expenses of $10,000, so you're going to be making a loss, $9,000 loss. But on top of this $10,000, you're going to be paying HST of $1,300. Okay, so if you to do this, then you using the regular method, you'd be asking CRA back for a refund of $1,170 that you paid HST in. Now, if you were to use the quick method, you'd be paying. But a lot of small businesses, they don't register because I guess the government says that if you less than $30,000 you don't have to register, so they don't register. But when you look and ask about how their businesses are doing, like these are not like home businesses. People do rent a kiosk, and Tow itself has HST and is a good justification for registering for a HST account. So what I want to say here is, like, a lot of these small businesses, if you're not registered, you should register, because there is money there's a lot of money that you leave on the table. So what are some of the top mistakes that people do? I think the first one is, like, you don't register when you're required. You're supposed to register, but you don't register. Sometimes you charge the wrong rate because you have a client that's over in another province, like Alberta, and they say that, well, I'm going to render a service in Ontario, so Alberta doesn't charge HST, and so it's going to be zero. But because the service is from Ontario, you should be charging the 13%. Or the third thing is not claiming HST for expenses. So that's what I mentioned before. You're not claiming your HST for expenses. Or maybe you've forgotten, but for small businesses that have HST expenses and it accumulates to be a lot, you're not claiming it. Filing late, so you're not doing this on time, there are penalties. When I'm talking about filing late is when you have to admit something, because CRA has some pretty punitive charges for late filing. So even if you have something you haven't calculated, you admit first before you file, so that you can avoid some of these mistakes. You can always make a correction to it. Perhaps you're registered but you don't charge HST, so you're supposed to charge your client something, but you're not charging your customer any HST. Now, one interesting thing that does happen sometimes, because people get money in there, is that they spend it. The other thing is not keeping records or having no system. QuickBooks Online has a quite useful system, accounting system for keeping expenses. So these are the top mistakes that people make. Okay, that's it for GST HST. If you need any help, there's a link over there. You can scan that on the website and contact me. My name is Ted Lem. I'm a CPA in Toronto.